Quick disclaimer before we dive in. I'm not a licensed psychologist or therapist. This video is just my take based on research and a lot of personal interest in psychology. I actually studied it for a while and even dreamed of becoming a psychologist at one point, but life happens. That said, I've always loved trying to understand why people and fictional characters are the way they are, especially when it comes to trauma and healing. This video does go into some heavy themes: trauma, loss, emotional pain, so just a heads up in case you need to pause or take care of yourself. Also, while we're going to be exploring some of the darker parts of Caleb's story, this isn't all doom and gloom. There's healing too, and I'll get into that towards the end of the video. So stick with me, we'll get through the hard parts together. Thanks guys, hope you enjoy. Some children learn to love from lullabies. Caleb learned to love from loss. He's not an antagonist, a cautionary tale, or a character designed to be feared. Rather, he is a portrait of what happens when grief never resolves, when trauma becomes a foundation of identity, and when love is shaped not by freedom, but by fear. Caleb's character presents a case study in what happens when childhood trauma, unresolved mourning, and emotional isolation fuse into a single haunting survival loop. To understand Caleb is to step into the mind of someone who has never truly left the moment of trauma. He doesn't grow forward, he repeats. His entire existence is a loop of love, of guilt, of trying to protect someone he could never save when it mattered the most. As a child, it's implied that he experienced the repeated death of MC in experimentation scenarios, an experience that may have fundamentally reshaped his nervous system. He was not simply scarred by trauma, he was built by it. His emotional responses, attachment behaviours, and distorted sense of love are the result of a brain adapted for survival rather than connection. This video is not a justification, it's not a redemption arc, it's a psychological study of how grief calcifies into identity, how complex PTSD rewires the brain's architecture, and how love, when filtered through fear, becomes possessive, obsessive, and all-consuming. We'll examine the psychological framework that underpins Caleb's choices, how his early trauma created a neurological and emotional loop that he cannot escape, and how his overwhelming desire to protect MC is not a sign of strength, but a symptom of profound dysregulation and loss. Caleb does not seek power, he seeks safety, not for himself, but for the one person he believes he must never fail again. His love is real, but it is shaped by fear, and somewhere within him, a frightened boy still believes that if he can just keep her safe this time, the pain might finally stop. Even Caleb's earliest dreams, the ones that should have belonged to childhood wonder, were shaped not by curiosity, but by fear. His desire to become a pilot and join the Deepspace Aviation Administration wasn't born from ambition or adventure. It was built around one singular belief. If he could fly, he could save her. To him, piloting wasn't a career, it was an escape plan, a way to lift MC above the dangers of a world that had already taken so much from them. While other children might dream of soaring for the thrill, Caleb's imagination was built entirely around survival. He didn't dream of the stars, he dreamed of distance, from danger, from death, and from loss. Every part of his identity was constructed as a response to powerlessness. If he could learn to fly, then maybe he'd never have to feel helpless again. But this dream, like so much of his life, was born in trauma. And even before he entered the cockpit, the sky itself had already become a metaphor for escape, for freedom, for control. For the illusion that if he could just carry her high enough, far enough, fast enough, then nothing could touch them again. It was never really about flying. It was about not failing her again. Caleb's emotional development appears to have halted at the moment of his earliest trauma, the first time he witnessed MC's death. While the full details remain obscured, what's clear is that Caleb experienced profound grief and instability at a formative age. This kind of early childhood trauma has a significant impact on both the structure and function of the developing brain. A psychological paper called The Impact of Childhood Maltreatment, a review of neurobiological and genetic factors, shows that children exposed to early trauma often display overdevelopment in the amygdala, the brain's fear and threat detection center, and underdevelopment in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function, impulse control, and emotional regulation. Caleb's behaviors reflect these neurological changes. He is impulsive, emotionally reactive, and prone to black and white thinking when it comes to MC's safety. In Lucid Dreams, he lashes out at Colonel Heath in a fit of rage after an ambush puts MC at risk. In fact, his first words upon confronting Colonel Heath are,
"Who said you could start it when she was around?"
How could you?
His concern bypasses protocol, logic, and even diplomacy. This is pure limbic system override, a response rooted in survival, not strategy. It is the amygdala taking control when the prefrontal cortex is overwhelmed. Such reactions are not signs of weakness, but of a brain that has been forced to operate in a constant state of threat awareness, a condition known as hypervigilance, common in those with complex PTSD. There is a sense that Caleb never truly moves past his childhood emotionally. In Endless Summer, he reminisces about MC needing help to reach the top shelf as a child, then asks why she can't as an adult. Check this scene out for a second.
"When you were a kid, you were too short to reach the books on the top shelf. How come you still can't get to them as an adult?" Did the shelf grow taller with you?
This moment seems harmless, but on the surface, it's deeply revealing. Caleb's image of MC is frozen in time. He still sees her as someone small, dependent, and in need of protection. Not because he underestimates her, but because he needs her to need him. When in exclusive aftertaste, she reaches for the shelf without his help, his subtle unraveling begins. This seemingly minor event threatens the foundation of his self-worth. Without the role of protector, who is he? This is where psychological arrest becomes apparent. Caleb's identity was built in response to trauma, specifically his role as MC's shield. His need to protect her is not merely affection, it is the scaffolding of his emotional survival. In both Rain's Embrace and Homecoming Wings, Caleb's trauma loop demonstrates something more explicitly dangerous, not just for himself, but for MC as well. These scenes reveal his desire not only to protect her, but to preserve her, to trap her in a version of the past where she still needs him, where he is still enough. In Rain's Embrace, Caleb and MC are physically locked in the attic, but it quickly becomes clear that Caleb is emotionally locked in time. He confesses that he once locked her in the attic as a child to keep her safe from bullies, a disturbing but very telling memory. His actions, even as a child, stemmed from the idea that control is safety. And when she asserts that she no longer needs protection, his reaction is not just frustration, it's grief. He challenges her to physically fight him, framing her independence as something she must prove before he can accept it. In trauma psychology, this aligns with emotional regression, where an individual reverts to earlier attachment patterns in a response to perceived abandonment. Caleb is no longer speaking to MC as an equal. He is responding to her as if she is still the child who once needed him, and as if he is still the boy who couldn't keep her safe. His emotional unraveling culminates in this moment of clarity.
Right. I forgot. You're not a little kid who needs to be protected anymore. It's me who can't let go. I want to keep you in a world where it's just the two of us.
Here, Caleb admits something to himself. His love is possessive not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate need to preserve the illusion of safety and emotional relevance. He doesn't want to dominate MC. He wants to freeze her in time. Because if she grows, he becomes obsolete. And that emotional extinction is something his trauma-wired brain cannot tolerate. This desire for emotional stasis and fantasy control is taken to an even more intense level in Homecoming Wings. When MC prepares to leave, Caleb suggests they have dinner, a seemingly ordinary gesture that masks his deep desperation to stop her from pulling away. He grabs her arm, and she pulls back angrily, distancing herself by sitting on the couch, making it clear that the emotional closeness he's seeking is not mutual. What follows isn't an argument, it's a breakdown in the relational dynamic they once shared. Take a look at this scene.
I wonder, how did you turn into someone I hardly recognize?
Oh, I know. You're thinking some chip got put into my brain, right? And now I'm no longer who I used to be? What if I told you I was always like this?
When Caleb says, "What if I told you I was always like this?" is a very chilling admission. Not that he's been changed by the Turing chip, but that the darkness, the obsession, and the volatility have always existed beneath the surface, held in check only by the illusion of stability. He tries to caress her face, she pulls away, and then this happens.
The people who are after your power, who want to hurt you, they should all just disappear. You're only safe when you're by my side.
I'd rather face danger head-on than safely live like this. I don't need you.
You don't need me? Is that what you think? All right. What do you need? You can tell me. We can return to Lincoln if that's what you want. If you want to return to the past, we'll rebuild our old house and move in together. And if one house isn't enough, I'll build you a whole maze. I'll decorate it with everything you could ever want. It will be the most beautiful, stunning garden you've ever seen. No one will be able to find you ever again. I'll protect you forever.
This vision of love, a beautiful prison where she is hidden, untouched, and safe, captures the essence of Caleb's trauma. What he offers isn't a relationship, it's a retreat, a closed-loop fantasy where neither of them has to face uncertainty, risk, or loss again. Without that role, the unresolved helplessness of his past resurfaces. Developmental trauma research indicates that when children experience overwhelming fear or powerlessness, their psychological development may stagnate, leaving them emotionally stuck in survival patterns long after the danger has passed. Caleb isn't emotionally 25. He is still the boy who couldn't save the person he loved. In this way, Caleb's protective nature becomes both a coping mechanism and a prison. Every time MC demonstrates independence, it unconsciously threatens the belief that his love and usefulness are what keep her safe. His nervous system interprets emotional autonomy not as growth, but as a precursor to abandonment. This explains why his reactions to MC's freedom can be so intense. Her independence reactivates the trauma loop. She is slipping through his fingers again, and this time, as before, he believes it might cost her her life. While Caleb's early trauma laid the neurological groundwork for his emotional instability, it is the repetition of traumatic dynamics throughout his life that firmly situates him in the realm of complex PTSD, otherwise known as CPTSD. Unlike classic PTSD, which often develops after a single traumatic event, CPTSD arises from prolonged, repeated trauma, particularly in interpersonal or institutional contexts where the individual is unable to escape or make sense of their suffering. In Caleb's case, this includes his near-death experience in the Deepspace tunnel in his anecdote Pathless Realm, the explosion that seemingly killed Josephine, and his eventual entanglement with the Far Space Fleet and Professor Lucius, all compounding layers of trauma without resolution. One of the most defining features of CPTSD is emotional dysregulation, a struggle to modulate strong emotional responses. This is evident throughout Caleb's story. These moments aren't manipulative outbursts, they're the product of a brain flooded with stress hormones operating in a state of limbic override. The amygdala hijacks the emotional experience, while the prefrontal cortex, which should help contextualize and regulate these emotions, fails to exert control, a hallmark of trauma survivors under stress. Caleb's trauma responses are cyclical, not linear. He is not healing, he is looping. The concept of trauma loop is grounded in what psychologist Bessel van der Kolk describes as the repetition compulsion, the subconscious reenactment of traumatic events in an attempt to rewrite the outcome. In Caleb's life, this takes the form of obsessive protection and repeated self-sacrifice. He positions himself again and again in situations where he can be MC's shield, as if protecting her now will redeem the countless times he failed to do so in the past, or, in the darkest interpretation, the times he believes he failed her during childhood experimentation. This loop is especially visible in his reaction to MC's near-death or autonomy, which he subconsciously equates with abandonment or failure. In CPTSD, survivors often become emotionally numb or detached, a symptom rooted in the brain's attempt to shut down chronic distress. In Caleb's case, only pain seems to pierce that numbness, reinforcing the trauma loop where pain becomes proof of connection. At its core, Caleb's behavior is not irrational. It is the natural outcome of a nervous system shaped by fear, grief, and helplessness, and trapped in patterns that seek emotional safety through repetition, no matter how destructive that repetition becomes. He does not seek control for its own sake. He seeks to relive the trauma differently, to finally get it right, even if it means enduring constant emotional pain to do so. If Caleb's trauma loop forms the structure of his psychological world, his attachment style is the emotional thread that ties everything together, especially in how he relates to MC. Caleb exhibits what attachment psychologists classify as a disorganized attachment style, one that forms in children who experience both deep emotional need and fear of the very figures they are supposed to trust. This attachment pattern often results in adult behaviors that are both hyper-clingy and distancing, protective and controlling, loving and emotionally volatile, all of which define Caleb's relationship with MC. Disorganized attachment doesn't simply mean Caleb is conflicted. It means that for him, closeness and danger are intertwined. He craves intimacy, but on a neurological level, his brain perceives emotional vulnerability as a threat. This internal conflict is evident in hidden ways.
I can't have any weaknesses. Then you'll feel safe relying on me. Do you feel it? This is my weakness. She's here. For a long time, she's been here.
As Caleb's trauma deepens, so does the externalization of his fractured identity. This fragmentation takes its most literal and horrifying form in the Turing chip, a mind-altering implant capable of suppressing memory, reshaping personality, and even erasing the self. While fiction in design, the chip functions symbolically as a sci-fi stand-in for trauma-induced disassociation, a neurological coping mechanism in which the brain severs conscious access to painful experiences in order to survive. In Caleb's case, the chip does not create disassociation, it formalizes it. What trauma had already started, the chip is designed to complete. In Lucid Dreams, Caleb's inner and outer battles actually collide. After he collapses and MC takes him home, the Turing chip activates with a very cold and clinical alert.
Warning. Emotional fluctuations have surpassed the threshold limit.
Don't take her away.
Commencing chip activation process. Executing mandatory erasure of neurons.
This moment is chilling, not just because of Caleb's collapse, but because it exposes the mechanistic monitoring of his trauma response. His emotions are no longer his own. The very act of feeling too intensely, grief, fear, love, is enough to destabilize his nervous system. During the collapse, Caleb is locked in a nightmare.
Don't take her away.
This is not just a line. It is a raw, subconscious cry from the deepest parts of Caleb's trauma brain, the part still trapped in the past, still trying to stop the moment of loss from happening. That this fear emerges in a dream state during emotional overload reveals just how ingrained the trauma is neurologically. It's not a memory he can recall at will. It's a terror embedded in his autonomic nervous system. If we look at this through a psychological lens, this aligns with van der Kolk's concept of the living trauma, in which unresolved pain doesn't simply affect memory, but reorganizes the body's stress response systems. In Caleb's case, the chip becomes a stand-in for both his trauma history and institutional control, a mechanism that aims to suppress emotional pain, yet ironically triggers deeper physiological collapse when emotions inevitably break through. What this scene shows is that Caleb's core conflict is no longer emotional alone. It is somatic, systemic, and involuntary. He cannot cry, grieve, or even love freely without it being seen by the technology inside him as a threat. His very capacity to feel has been turned against him. In this way, the Turing chip is not just a metaphor for disassociation, it's an embodiment of it. A gatekeeper that punishes emotional truth. Now, another particularly stark symbol of Caleb's trauma is his bionic arm. While it serves a clear narrative function, signaling his survival and transformation after the explosion, it also acts as a physical metaphor for his emotional state, disconnected, artificial, and only able to feel pain. Let's take a look at Painful Signal.
I didn't mean to hide it from you. I just didn't expect you to find out like this. I barely feel any pain unless it's under repair. But I can't even feel you anymore.
Her touch doesn't register. There is no warmth, no sensation, only pain when the arm is being repaired, overridden, or stressed. In trauma psychology, this moment is chillingly familiar. It mirrors the experience of emotional numbness and bodily alienation reported by many survivors of long-term trauma. From a neurological perspective, these experiences are linked to problems in areas of the brain that handle pain, body awareness, and emotions, specifically the ACC and the insula. Research shows that people with PTSD or complex PTSD often have unusual activity in these parts of the brain. Sometimes they become too sensitive to pain, and other times they feel numb or disconnected from their own bodies. Caleb's relationship to his arm, feeling pain but no touch, becomes a direct mirror of this trauma response. Pain is the only feeling he can trust as real. The exchange that follows in Painful Signal drives this point home.
If that's what it takes to feel you, I'll accept it.
For trauma survivors, this dynamic is common. Emotional numbness can be more terrifying than pain, because pain, at the very least, is proof of existence. In Caleb's case, pain becomes the tether between him and MC. Her touch doesn't register physically, but the emotional ache that accompanies her presence, or worse, her distance, cuts deeper than any weapon ever could. This moment also highlights the codependency in their relationship. They are both trapped in a dynamic where hurt becomes the language of intimacy.
You're the only one who can ease my pain.
This is a heartbreaking attempt at mutual healing. She's asking him to reach through the numbness, to connect, despite the damage and the scars. He responds, "You're the only one who can ease my pain." It's a declaration that places the weight of his recovery entirely on her shoulders. Another symptom of his trauma, and another layer of emotional burden she now shares. This physical disconnection, the inability to feel the person he loves, reflects a deeper, more insidious truth. Caleb cannot fully experience love in a body or a mind that has been shaped by trauma. The mechanisms designed to protect him, emotionally, neurologically, even mechanically, now keep him apart from the very thing he craves most: connection. By the time we reach the events of Lucid Dreams, it's no longer just Caleb who is emotionally unraveling. MC begins to mirror his behaviours, engaging in acts of emotional manipulation, deception, and self-harm, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. We see this most clearly in MC's decision to implant herself with a Turing chip. She willingly subjects herself to the same mind-altering technology that destroyed Caleb's autonomy, believing that by doing so, she will bridge the growing distance between them. What this reflects psychologically is a dangerous form of mirroring, a behaviour common in trauma-bonded relationships where one partner unconsciously begins to reflect the emotional dysregulation and survival mechanisms of the other. When the chip begins to alter MC's behaviour, she even goes as far as to manipulate Caleb during his apparent memory loss, pretending they are lovers, hiding his uniform and tech, recreating their childhood dynamic in a fantasy bubble. But this illusion collapses when it's revealed that Caleb never lost his memory. He was simply playing along. Two people, both disassociating, both pretending, trying to rewrite their shared pain into something survivable. At the heart of Caleb's story lies a constant tension between self-preservation and self-erasure, a psychological war that unfolds not just in his actions, but in the symbols woven throughout his arc. Caleb's world is defined by a physics of trauma, forces that pull, fracture, consume, and distort. These symbols are not merely aesthetic, they are reflections of his fractured psyche, his collapsing sense of self, and his desperate fight to hold on to identity in a world determined to overwrite it. One of the most powerful recurring motifs is gravity, an extension of Caleb's evil, but also a mirror of his psychological state. Gravity is attraction, but it is also pressure. It's connection, but it's also collapse. In this way, his power is not a gift. It's a metaphor for his trauma, the inability to release, the need to hold, even when it hurts them both. Now, I want to remind you of the final scene in Lucid Dreams.
The partial modification that's been completed is still under the Turing chip's control. However, we can't access the chip's records of Caleb's memories.
Has the chip been damaged?
The chip's integrity is at 93%. It appears he's purposefully sealed his brain rather than damaging it. The patrol data we input disappears whenever it reaches a specific area. It doesn't get rejected or intercepted. It vanishes as if...
It's being pulled into a black hole.
Yes.
Humans are inherently flawed, making us indecisive and hesitant. Only by erasing these weaknesses can we become invincible. If we don't tackle this area, we'll never be able to achieve a complete modification to him. Is there another way?
Found it. This area was encrypted with multiple layers, so there must be a key to unlock it. There's likely only one key, and it's probably a one-time use.
Then let's find it, no matter the cost.
The use of black holes in Lucid Dreams deepens this metaphor. Black holes are regions of space where matter and memory disappear, much like the way Caleb's past is obscured, fragmented, and overwritten. When Professor Lucius and his team attempt to unlock Caleb's brain, they speak of his sealed neural regions like singularities, unreachable cores where even technology cannot penetrate. From a psychological standpoint, this is an example of trauma-induced memory compartmentalization. His mind has created internal sanctuaries, not to deceive others, but to protect what little of himself remains. The cognitive resistance, Caleb's refusal to be fully rewritten by the Turing chip, is one of the most powerful testaments to his inner strength. It reflects what trauma theorist Bessel van der Kolk describes as the brain's last defense against annihilation, the ability to partition off the self, to safeguard identity, even when the body is controlled or the memory is blurred. Caleb's mind becomes his battlefield, and he wins, not by overpowering his oppressors, but by keeping the truth of who he is locked away, even from himself. In this sense, Caleb's story becomes more than just a tragic romance or psychological case study. It becomes a story about what trauma cannot take, the pieces of self that resist even the most violent forms of manipulation. Now, in saying all of this, there is actually a memory that suggests Caleb is capable of healing. Not through force or fantasy, but through surrender. It happens in Hidden Waves, which is set after the events of Lucid Dream. We see Caleb not as a protector or a soldier, but as a man undone by illness. And for the first time, he is the one behind the locked door. He isolates himself to keep MC safe, believing that his presence, which is unstable and vulnerable, is more dangerous than his absence. This is a striking reversal. The same boy who once locked her in an attic to shield her from harm now shuts himself away instead. But the most important change isn't what he does, it's what he allows. He opens the door. Not because he's fully healed or because the threat is gone, but because she asks him to. Because she reminds him that love isn't about hiding the worst parts of yourself, it's about choosing to be seen anyway. In this moment, Caleb allows himself to be vulnerable not as a weakness, but as an act of trust. And in doing so, he breaks his own loop. Vulnerability becomes connection, not danger. More importantly, he begins to understand that MC doesn't belong behind him, where he can shield her from the world. She belongs beside him, as a partner, not someone to protect, possess, or preserve. This is not just character development. It's the first true fracture in the trauma architecture that has governed his entire life. And maybe that's the beginning of something different. Not survival, not retreat, but healing. From childhood to kernel, from locked attics to collapsing memories, Caleb has been trying to fix a moment he never had the power to stop. Every part of his identity, from the pilot's dream to the mechanical arm, from the Turing chip to the locked doors, is an echo of a trauma he never escaped. And yet, amid all the pain, there are flickers of change, of healing. Hidden Wave shows us the first real fracture in Caleb's trauma loop, not one that leads to collapse, but to openness. For the first time, he lets her in, not to protect her, not to control her, but to be with her. Vulnerability becomes something shared, not hidden. And if Caleb can learn to heal, not by erasing the past, but by living beyond it, then maybe that house he once promised to build wouldn't be a prison disguised as a paradise. Maybe it could become what neither of them had before. A home built not on fear, but on true, lasting love.